What's new?
Nothing much.
Same here.
You are getting married tomorrow. I wouldn't deny myself the chance to meet the man you finally hooked.
Would you believe I took the subway? The subway, Mary. There was this one weirdo trying to write graffiti on me.
You must be so relieved, Mrs. Morgenstern. Rhoda told me that if she wasn't married before she was 35, you said you'd take all your clothes off in Macy's window.
Anyway, Rhoda's such a clever, resourceful girl. I just know somehow she'll get here and everything will be just fine and we'll all end up laughing about it later, don't you think?
I'll kill you.
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood.
So, Tony, you're going to hate me.
It's a pretty safe bet.
Every week you want to sing songs, and I stop you so we don't get into copyright issues and get pulled off the air.
It's not because of my voice.
No, that's part of it, but we won't go there. It's mostly the copyright issue. But I'm going to break that today. I'm going to break that rule.
Oh.
I put you down, and I'm always saying don't do it, and I'm going to do it today.
You're going to
here I
sing?
go. La 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 la.
I knew it.
La 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 la.
And they're not going to get the lyrics. That's for sure. I wonder why they didn't write lyrics to that song.
I like it.
Rhoda is single, now she is wed.
And then she's single again.
Rhoda's divorced, and then she is dead. God, I'm so
Scott,
fast. I'm so fast.
Tony, we have our first guest co-host today.
We do.
And I think you should introduce the gentleman.
We do. I am so excited. I always say that. But I am, so I'm not lying.
Tony's easily to excite.
I am very easily excited, yes. No, I'm thrilled because we have with us the one and only Scott Fullerton, who is, for those of you who are in the know, is the host of the Left of Str8 Podcast, which I was on, about a year ago, Scott? It was about a year ago, wasn't it? I was.
Yeah, I think it was.
It was my first guest, appearance. Well, it was my first guest appearance on the podcast. I was on The Good Vanilla before that, but it was certainly a memorable one, and we talked forever. So I am so thrilled, and I'm Brad too, to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it. I'm so excited and honored to be the first guest co-host, and I'm loving what you guys are doing. I told you as soon as you started the podcast, I was so excited for you and Brad, and I was a little jealous of Brad. It's like you and I had talked about it a year ago, damn it. And look at Brad, Mr. renowned author, and just jumps right in and steals my thunder. That's okay. I can deal.
I was just out there twisting in the wind, and Brad.
Scott threatened to steal you away from me, and there's days where I think, maybe he should.
Right.
Only when I try to sing.
And speaking of Left of Str8, just about a week from now, this show for you future people is going to drop on July 31st of 2024.
You are awfully optimistic about that.
Oh, yes.
You are awfully optimistic. Oh, okay. All right.
In just over a week, Tony and I will be a guest on Scott's show.
Yes.
Live. That's scary.
Live in Palm Springs.
I don't know how you know when you're doing these shows. I try, unless I'm doing it live, I have no idea when my shows are going to air.
I don't usually schedule them, but this one I'm going to stick to.
He's being incredibly optimistic. Yes, we are going to be live in Palm Springs, if that's not an oxymoron. Yes, and I am very excited about... Nobody got that? I thought that was funny. I'm very excited. We're very excited to do it. I'm very excited to do my first live podcast. Well, yeah, my first live podcast.
It'll be fun. I'm so excited to have you guys out to Palm Springs. I get to do a little visit there on occasion during the summer. And the summer heat, if it doesn't do us in, we'll have a nice conversation. But we'll be inside, so we'll be okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, so we're not going to be out in the 122-degree weather? Really? Oh, okay.
See, I live in a different California desert, and we usually hit 110. Where Scott is, it's usually about 10 degrees hotter. So, boy, I look forward to that.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation today because not only do we have a fabulous co-host, but we hinted a little bit about it. We teased it a couple weeks ago. If this does indeed air in a couple weeks or drop in a couple weeks.
If it airs when I said it's going to be a few weeks
ago. Yes, indeed. But grab your rice and your front seats and your aisle seats because we are going to be talking about one of the greatest episodes in television history, Rhoda Morgenstern's wedding. Yes, Rhoda's wedding from Rhoda.
Yes.
That's why Brad was doing la 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 la. That's the theme song to Rhoda.
A great show. Rhoda was a spinoff of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It ran for 5 seasons, though I only count the first 3 seasons. The last 2 don't exist in my head.
Yeah, what a trajectory. What a trajectory. We can, which I'd love to discuss a little bit about that because I think you have to. I think you have to talk about, what I was thinking is that we're going to talk about 2 things on this episode. We're going to talk about one of the greatest TV shows in the history of television, Rhoda's Wedding, and 2, one of the biggest mysteries in the history of TV, which is what the hell happened to Rhoda Morgenstern? She got married and she was gone. What happened to her?
Yeah. It was a travesty.
Biggest Jessica Fletcher level mystery. What do you think, Scott? I mean, tell us a little bit about your history with Rhoda.
Well, I was a big Mary Tyler Moore. I loved Rhoda. Huge Nancy Walker fan. So it's like, I thought the casting was great to begin with. And she was so much fun. And I got to tell you, I was a little shocked listening to Mary Tyler Moore. I didn't know they didn't like her at first because she was one of my favorite characters in Mary Tyler Moore's show. When they spun her off, I was so excited. But I got to say, 8 episodes in to get married, I don't know why you kill your lead like that. It was a little interesting to me. But I enjoyed the show.
You're right,
I think they jumped the shark a little early getting her married. I think they could have drug it out a lot longer.
No foreplay whatsoever.
I have a lot to say about that. And, Scott, before we get into this, I have to ask you a question because Tony and I have been debating something.
Oh, yeah.
We have been discussing whether or not we should do spoiler alerts. Now, our TV and movies typically are going to be forward in 1990, though there will be exceptions. So we've been debating, it's so long ago. Do we need spoiler alerts or do we not? What do you think?
I would not do a spoiler alert. You're classic Hollywood, right? So if they don't know the classic Hollywood, then spoilers be damned. I think you're good.
Yeah. We are now at 50 years, almost. It will be in October. It will be 50 years since this episode aired. It aired October 28th, 1974. So if we're going to do a spoiler alert for a 50-year-old, do a spoiler alert for me as a 50-year-old. Spoiler alert, he's 50.
Do you know all those facts that people might not know going into it? And then you hear about it and you see it in the episode. Between your expertise and Brad's just fun analysis of it, I think it's really, you want those spoilers. I think it kind of gives a little context to what you're talking about. So,
we're not going to stop the spoilers. And first of all, Tony, thank you for pissing me off by reminding me that this has been 50 years. Go to hell. And let's talk about the spoiler thing later.
Yeah.
We'll do it. Maybe we'll consider it for another day.
That's true. That's a good idea. But yeah, 50 years. 50 years. Isn't that amazing? It seems like yesterday. Well, that's because I just watched it yesterday. But it seems like 50 years that this happened. But Scott, it was interesting you said, Scott, that they blew their wad like 8 episodes in because originally the idea was to stretch it out for an entire year. And Rhoda and Joe would get married at the end of the season. However, one of the brilliant minds at CBS thought, oh, no, let's do it during sweeps. And so that's why there are basically 8 episodes prior to this that lead up to this wedding, which was, of course, the biggest event. And then then they're like the morning after, like, okay, now what do we do? Because they're married. Uh-oh. That
choice did pay off. I mean, this was I Love Lucy, the Little Ricky episode was the biggest rated episode of all time. And then
Yes.
Rhoda
No. Rhoda was second. Lucy was still number one. Lucy got a 73.9 share in 1953, and Rhoda had 52 million viewers. Lucy had 44, but you have to remember that a hell of a lot more people had TV sets in 1974 than they did in 1953. So you have to go by shares. And Lucy had a 73.9 share, which beat Rhoda. However, 52 million people. The world literally stopped for this wedding, which is insane. Howard Cosell, who was over on ABC doing Monday Night Football, was saying, I guess it's time to get out the chicken liver because it's time for, he was constantly referring to everybody watching Rhoda's wedding and not ABC Monday Night Football.
And that reminded me of the final episode of Seinfeld when Nick at Night or one of those channels put a blank screen that said, we're watching the final episode of Seinfeld 2. And they left it there for an hour.
I mean, it's that epic. It's that epic. Do you remember when this aired? Am I embarrassing people here?
Was it 75 to 79, right? It's a
74.
74. Okay. Oof. Yeah. November sweeps of 74 then. I thought it was 75, but yeah, I didn't know it was.
Do you remember it, Brad?
I remember this very clearly because my sister-in-law, my brother moved in with us temporarily when he was moving, and my sister-in-law and I were best buds. And she and I sat there and watched it together, and we laughed and we laughed and we laughed through the whole thing. So I remember it very clearly. Of course, I was a tot at the time. We have to get that clear.
Very clear. I was in utero. I remember my mother was watching it, and I was in utero, and I could just feel the vibrations.
I heard about
feel the vibrations of it. Well, no, it was an event.
I was sneaking into watching those shows. I was young at the time, but I would sneak to stay up to watch Carol Burnett and Mary Tyler Moore and Rhoda. I remember I have very distinct memories of staying late and sneaking into because my parents would watch them, and I'd kind of sneak in and sit behind them and watch them. I have very distinct memories of that.
It's crazy. Valerie Harper said that she got hundreds, thousands of toasters from fans because you always gave a toaster when people got married, and gifts, and there were wedding parties, and it was just a celebration. And then and that kind of carried on through the first season, and then for it to just fall. So the reverse is when they decided they had to divorce them because they just didn't have the stories. They got hundreds of thousands of CBS did hate mail about divorce, about separating Rhoda and Joe because they were, the love couple of the 70s. And CBS felt for some reason they had no choice because the writers were feeling trapped. The writers were feeling stymied by this situation they'd created. And Valerie Harper said that what they were trying to do, and what, in hindsight, she said, what they were trying to create was Mad About You.
That's what I was going to say. This was the precursor to Mad About You.
Exactly, like a sexy take on marriage. But they couldn't because this was 1974, and there were still censors. And the censors would come down to the set and say, Joe cannot be shirtless in that bed. He's got to put a pajama top on. And they felt very constrained about, there was no longer twin beds, but twin beds was not that far not that far away. They could actually be a single, so they felt very constrained. The writers felt very constrained about the stories they could tell. And that's the reason why they broke them up. But the backlash, I think the ratings fell from I think it was number 24 its second year, and it was number 7. It was number 7 its second year, and it dropped to 33. The third year when they separated them. That's how much viewership dropped. And then it kind of had a little bit of a rebound the following year and went back up into the 20s. But, the writing was on the wall.
The final season was in the toilet.
Well, they didn't even air all of the episodes of the final season.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so sad.
I think they made the mistake of making him so unlikable. I think that's what hurt it. I think if they would have killed him off or something, sad to say, or if he would have got a job somewhere else or something, and they pulled it apart, but they made it. Well, I just don't think that you kind of forced me and rushed me into this. I think it made him so unlikable that the audience was like, wait a second, but you guys were so in love by the first episode and married by the 8th episode, and now all of a sudden you didn't really like the whole idea of it. I think it alienated a lot of viewers.
Well, yeah. And poor David Groh. I mean, can you imagine being saddled with that the rest of your career? Oh, you're the guy who dumped the beloved Rhoda Morgenstern. I mean, no matter what part you're going to play for the rest of your life, you're still the guy who dumped Rhoda, you know?
I am furious every time I think about it because they were a great couple. He was a great guy.
He was.
I loved it every time. They may not have showed him shirtless in bed, but I loved it every time he took his shirt off. And then he turned in, like overnight, he turned into this asshole.
Yeah.
And just a horrible, horrible person.
Well, the breakup episode, which is the first episode of the third season, is it's like it comes out of nowhere. It's just like, what? You guys were just trying to get away for a sexy romantic weekend, and now you're suddenly feeling stifled by your marriage. Yeah, it really came out of nowhere. There was no build to it. And I think you're right. I think they did something very brave because, you know, as we said during the Mary Tyler Moore podcast, no Jews, no divorcees, no people from New York, and no one with mustaches. Well, they had 3 out of 4 there. You know, Joe didn't have a mustache, but he might as well with that hairy chest. And, you know, 70s. Woo. And so they had 3 out of 4 there, and they were very brave to say, okay, we're going to divorce you. And I don't know that they quite expected the backlash they got, which kind of, you know, and after that, but here's the thing. This is kind of like I was saying about what the hell happened to Rhoda Morgenstern. I guess, how do you make a woman who's going through the trauma of a divorce funny? That's your first obstacle, okay? And also, there was just no energy anymore. I mean, she on the Mary Tyler Moore show in the first season of Rhoda, she's just this wonderful, vivacious, sarcastic, you know, always with a quip, and she just seems annoyed for the last 2 seasons. She's just annoyed with everybody. And with all those annoying characters they added, Benny and the one,
God,
you know, the singer,
Ron Silver,
Johnny Bravo, was that his name? I can't remember what his name is.
Yes.
You know, it's just like Ron Silver's character. I love Ron Silver. Ron Silver's was a wonderful actor, but his character was so annoying.
Right.
I couldn't stand him.
You know, it was just basically her, Julie Kavner. And then, by the way, Nancy Walker also left. So not only do you, talk about timing, not only do you have Rhoda and Joe splitting up, Nancy Walker jumped ship to do her own show. I mean, she came back, but by then it was too late.
Right. I didn't agree with the writing choices at all. I mean, it was so well done the first season. And I just think that once, like you said, once they just came into this dilemma of what do they do now, I don't know if maybe they weren't happy that it's just, like you said, I agree with you. The joy was gone. By season 3, the joy was gone in her performance, it seemed like.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, what happened to me is, like Mary Tyler Moore, it was believable the first 3 seasons as far as the characters. You loved them. They were friends. You got to know them. And I got to say, I think the fact that they wrote him off is inexcusable. Granted, they may have had to, because I think of it as Mad About You.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, they may not have had the leeway that Mad About You had because of the time period. These are great writers. They could have done it.
Yeah.
To me, I feel like they were being lazy.
Yeah.
You know, Joe left the show, and it became a slapsticky 70s, 80s sitcom.
It just wasn't funny.
No, it wasn't funny. The characters were all annoying as hell. And I don't understand why, when there was such a huge backlash, the letters and everything else, and the ratings dropped, why didn't they bring Joe back and have them reunite?
You know, interesting. You know, that's interesting. You know, it's a lot of one of the producers who was unnamed said that the problem was that they saddled themselves with a really lousy actor playing Joe, which I don't think so. I think David Groh was a great actor. It was originally offered to Judd Hirsch from Taxi.
Tony, you and I get excited when we get messages and emails and texts from listeners that tell us how much they enjoy the show.
We do.
But you know, I think we should push it a little bit and ask them to go a little bit further.
Ooh, a challenge.
If you enjoy this show, let others know. 5 stars are great, whatever you want to give, except 1 star. If you have 1 star, say, you know, that show's not for me and move on. We accept that.
Yeah, you don't give us 1 star. Just say, no, not for me. Just skip it. Or tell your friends. That's the best way too, right? Tell your friends, hey, I have this great fun podcast with these 2 kooky guys who talk about movies and TV. We run the gamut We have everything.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're all over the place is a better way to put it.
But in a good way. So do it right now before you forget.
I think David Groh was a great actor. It was originally offered to Judd Hirsch from Taxi. Taxi obviously had not happened yet. But Judd Hirsch was originally offered the role of Joe. And you think about, okay, Judd Hirsch and Valerie Harper would have been fantastic together. And I wonder how much validity there is to the theory that David Groh just wasn't a strong enough actor for the series. What do you think?
I thought he did well. I mean, I thought the actor was okay. Was he as strong as Judd Hirsch? No. Judd Hirsch is one of my favorite actors and one of my favorite movies in Running on Empty. To me, at the time, I don't think there was enough characters they fleshed out, right? They started losing characters, and it was pretty much just Rhoda and Brenda, right? And then they had the other girl in Rhoda's business there, but it's like...
Yeah, they brought in Myra Morgenstern.
When everyone started leaving, when Nancy left and everyone, you really need to have people that you're in love with and kind of flesh out more characters was one of the things that I saw.
Yeah, you kind of wonder why they just didn't stick with the core they had in the beginning. They brought in Myra Morgenstern. They brought in that Ann Mira character. You're like, well, who are these people? What's wrong with, Brenda and Joe and Rhoda and Ida and Martin? I mean, there you go.
Well, Ida and Martin went off to do their own shows. Nancy Walker tried two different series.
She did, which was bad timing.
Harold Gold also tried to do his own show, which was one I never even heard of. I can't think what the name of it was.
But they should not have let them go so soon, I think. They should not, certainly not the same year that Joe left. Fred Silverman wanted to spin Valerie Harper off of Mary Tyler Moore the first year. He said to her, we want to spin you off. And Valerie Harper was such a neophyte at TV, she thought she was being fired. She's like, what? What do you mean? And he's like, no, we want to put you in your own series. And she was like, oh, no. It was the first year. And then when they finally came back to her the third year, and she's like, I don't know. And she went to Mary Tyler Moore, and Mary Tyler Moore said, you're a fool if you don't do it. And she said, what if I fail? And Mary said, well, you just come back to Minneapolis.
Yeah, which
unfortunately, Mary was off the air by that time it really failed, so she couldn't go back to Minneapolis. But Valerie Harper also said that it was actually Nancy Walker who made it clear to her when she went to Nancy Walker and said, they want me to do my own show. What do you think? And Nancy Walker said, Valerie, it's a job. Do it. And that kind of put it into perspective for Valerie Harper.
For those that, for some reason, have never seen this, or probably more likely forgot about it, which I don't know how you could still do that, I'm going to do a super quick rundown.
Oh, good.
Rhoda started in 1974, ran for 5 seasons till 1978. As I said, I ignored the last 2 seasons. This is after she spun off of Mary Tyler Moore after 4 seasons. Now, the premise of this show was Rhoda takes a trip to visit family in New York City, and Brenda babysits this kid, and Joe is his father who's divorced. And Rhoda meets him. They immediately fall in love. The first episode of the show is called Joe. And so Rhoda decides to stay. She's like, I'm not going back to Minneapolis. She calls Mary and says, send me my shit. And it's kind of interesting in the beginning. I like it that Rhoda is unemployed. She's kind of almost thinks she thinks it was maybe a bad decision because she has no work and she's living with Brenda, and she actually moves in with her parents and then back with Brenda. And then Joe wants them to move in together, and Rhoda says, no, I think I'd rather be married. And they get married. That's where episode 8 comes in. And I actually don't mind that it was episode 8 because I, again, think it should have been a Mad About You thing. I like this hip couple. I like that he had his own business. I like that Rhoda was a career woman that actually started her own business. And then they actually took that away and had her in this silly, was it a costume shop?
Yeah. Well, they tried to give her a Lou Grant. They tried Jack Doyle. They tried to give her own Lou Grant. Right. It's just like,
yeah, it was just awful. Just awful.
He ain't Ed Asner. Nobody's Edward Asner. Yeah. No. It's funny. The first episodes are so good because she's so insecure. She's Rhoda. She's insecure, but she's funny and she's fighting against it and she's self-deprecating. And then, I guess when she gets married, she's still self-deprecating. She's still unsure, and their thinking was that why I don't know what they were thinking basically, but they're taking her away from from her strengths. Her strength was Valerie Harper called her the victorious loser. Didn't Valerie Harper say that really funny, very famous thing that a friend of hers said, that Mary's the person that you want to be, Rhoda's the person you probably are, and Phyllis is the person that you're afraid you'll become. And that's them. That's the crux of it. Rhoda is you, the insecurities, the self-deprecation, and the first season is beautifully illustrated in that. And then it all goes away. She just gets sad.
So, Scott, I haven't prepared you for this, but do you want to start by talking about what this episode is about, how it begins?
Of the wedding episode, yeah.
Sure.
Well, I was excited to go back and revisit this one because I had bits and pieces. I remember her running through the streets and everything, but it begins with I gotta
Ida.
Prepare myself.
Brenda?
With Ida, well, of course, Ida. In the beginning there, they had the whole Jewish background, which they eventually got rid of. And so you have the Jewish mother that has to have this big wedding, right? So, of course, they start off with they're gonna have this small little wedding. Of course, Joe and Rhoda want to have this small little intimate wedding. And then Ida comes in and says, well, why don't we come have dinner at my place first? And of course, that goes into how many people are coming here? 79. and then you get the Jewish guilt. And I talked to your grandmother, and she's so excited for it. And just the whole premise of how it goes from this small little wedding into this huge ordeal. And I thought that was a great way to start it.
It's a brilliant, brilliant scene, isn't it? I mean, just the way the character of Ida manipulates them. When I called your grandmother at the home, and she thought she'd never live to see you get married. I mean, it's just the guilt.
And when she finally breaks Rhoda, and Rhoda says, okay, we'll do it. And she goes, whatever you want.
Whatever you want. I love it. She goes, I've invited a few people over. Oh, good, Ma. Before or after the wedding? During.
How do you get 79 people in a New York apartment?
It's such a great setup. But you're right. And what happened to that? What happened to those wonderful scenes of Ida and her guilt? It's so rich in character, and I love it. This show, the funny thing about this episode is, and the funny thing I realized about this episode is, who really steals this episode is Phyllis. I mean, it's Cloris Leachman's episode. It's just, she's the catalyst behind the mess that happens. And she has the best lines, the funniest takes. How about when she says, when they go to pick her up at the airport and Rhoda goes, I'm kind of surprised to see you here, Phyllis. And Phyllis goes, is it because I wasn't invited? And Rhoda goes, yeah, pretty much. And she goes, your friendship has been very important to me, Rhoda. I wouldn't miss the opportunity to meet the man you finally hooked.
No, I agree with that 100%. Just the big yellow dress, just what she chooses to wear to the wedding is she takes every bit of that and runs with that episode. So you're right. I think Phyllis is the star.
I mentioned on the Mary Tyler Moore episode how much I disliked Phyllis. I mean, I didn't even like disliking her. She just wasn't a fun character to me. She was just too damn annoying. But she was perfect in this episode. She was there was a tad too much of Phyllis, but she was perfect. But there is one thing that I think they failed in. This was the last time that Rhoda and Phyllis were together until the final episode of Mary Tyler Moore. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this would have been the perfect opportunity for Rhoda to finally get even with Phyllis. So when it was found out that Phyllis left Rhoda behind and they were waiting for Rhoda to show up, Ida should have kicked her out of that apartment and said, get lost. And have that be the end of Phyllis as far as that episode goes. I would love to have seen that.
Yeah, but love was all around that day. Everybody was happy. She got married. Ida said, I'll kill you.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was Ida's big line there. It was I'll kill you.
Her just reactions when Phyllis admits it. And she's just frozen. And
we kind of left out the important plot point is that Phyllis is feeling, because she wasn't invited, she doesn't really have a job to do with this wedding. She's feeling left out. And she just wants to do something to help out. So Rhoda says, okay, since you rented a car, Phyllis, do you want to pick me up? Because she didn't like the idea of a limousine. You want to pick me up and bring me to the apartment for the wedding? And Phyllis forgets. So Rhoda is stuck in Manhattan while everybody is gathering in Queens for the wedding, and Rhoda has to get to the Queens on the subway.
Actually, it's the Bronx.
And to the Bronx. I'm sorry, the Bronx. You're right. The Grand Concourse. So she has to get to the Bronx on the train, on the subway. And that is one of the most hysterically funny, memorable scenes ever. Rhoda running through New York, the streets of New York, and on the subway, which, by the way, the guy who's waiting, she looks over at this guy, and there's this guy standing next to her with a beard and kind of gives her the up and down. That was James L. Brooks, by the way.
Oh, I did not know that. That's kind of a fun fact.
The creator. And so Rhoda has to ride the subway to get to her own wedding. And she doesn't remember, she says, when she finally gets there, and she goes, some guy tried to write graffiti on me. This dress is shot. I'll never wear it again.
And I don't remember. Like I said, I remember these a little bit. I was just old enough to start remembering these when I watched them behind my parents. And it seemed like it went by so quick when I was a kid. And then watching all the different segments, I mean, it was a pretty long little run to get to the apartment. And they had the parts down when she's sitting in these actual subway and deciding to go to the subway and then running through the main streets. So it was a longer vignette than I thought.
Yeah, it was pretty long. And actually, here's something that jumped out at me. I am almost certain that on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, other than the opening credits, they never had an outdoor scene.
There were a couple.
Were there?
Yeah, there were. There were a couple. There was one in The Best of Enemies, that episode we talked about, where they're walking down the street at the very end of the episode. So yeah, there's a couple. Not a lot, though. There were not a lot. You're absolutely right.
Nothing like this.
Nothing like this. There was never an extended outdoor montage like that. No, not at all. How about Georgia Engel? when she says, you must be so relieved, Mrs. Morgenstern. Rhoda said if she wasn't married by the time you were 35, you'd take all your clothes off and Macy's went.
And being from Ohio, that she didn't remember anything about Ohio, I'm now personally offended. But yeah, her road trip. Being on a road trip myself, I love revisiting the road trip. That was hilarious. Wisconsin, they gave me a piece of cheese.
What did they say? What did they say in Illinois? What are you hauling, honey? It was, here's the interesting thing, though, is that when you really think about it, so the real stars of this episode of Rhoda are pretty much the actors from the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So, I don't think that's like a harbinger of what's going to happen with the show, but it is kind of interesting that you have Phyllis, Lou has some great lines, and Georgette, who are really giving you the real laugh lines in this episode. And Brenda and Ida, not so much, but Rhoda are just kind of hanging back. It's kind of interesting.
And Murray, as always, just kind of fades into the background.
Murray fades in the background. Well, Murray gets Phyllis's luggage.
Kavner didn't have much to give except when she met Phyllis. I mean, that was her biggest comedy moment, I think, of the entire time, is when she had to take Phyllis down to get the car or whatever. And she said, oh, she's everything you said she was. But it's like, she just didn't really have a lot of, like you said, big comedy moments.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's it's brilliantly written. But it's interesting that they relied so much on the cast of the Mary Tyler Moore Show to carry this episode.
And can we talk about Julie Kavner for a moment?
Please.
I adore her. I wish she didn't stop acting when she started doing The Simpsons. Because she either stopped right then or very soon after.
Yeah.
And I know she's had a great career doing that, so more power to her. But I've always loved her in everything that she was in. I do know after this series ended, she avoided playing frumpy roles because she was great at it in this.
Yeah, she was in Nora Ephron, one of Nora Ephron's first movies called This Is My Life, where she played a stand-up comic. It's somewhat frumpy. I mean, it's kind of hard not to be, when you're Julie Kavner, frumpy kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah.
I mean, she's not like Valerie Harper, who was so stunningly beautiful, and you're like, even when she was, Rhoda on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, you're like, wow, you're a beautiful woman. But isn't it funny how, as the series progressed, as Rhoda progressed, you definitely had the feeling that who else was waiting for a spinoff called Brenda? Because you just felt like it was going to happen, because it was just, Rhoda became Mary and Brenda became Rhoda, and you're just waiting for that spinoff, which they probably would have married her off and ruined it too.
They would have married her off and had them divorced in season 3 or 4.
But how about Lorenzo Music?
Oh,
The Carlton. The doorman. I mean, another.
You mean Garfield?
What's that?
You mean Garfield?
Yes, exactly. You mean Yes. Another brilliant character that was he wasn't supposed to originally do it, but he filled in during the first read through, and everybody fell on the floor laughing. And they're like, why don't you just do it, Lorenzo? Because Lorenzo was a writer on the show. He's one of the producers. He's one of the writers on this episode. And another one who was, so they have these brilliant characters and they just let them all go. They just let them all go.
I thought that Carlton was probably the best part of a lot of those episodes. I mean, that comic timing was just perfect when they'd go down. I loved him. I thought he did an amazing job. And so even in this episode, when she calls down to be on the lookout for Phyllis in the car, it's like, a competent doorman's I'll have a cab, I'll get someone right here for you. And Carlton just doesn't have a clue what he's supposed to be doing. He's just.
How about when he asks, can I kiss the bride? And she says, Carlton, there's a buck in it for you if you keep your hands off the bride.
Is this the episode where he says there's a strange lady coming up to the apartment?
Yes.
Well, I know it's your mother. Yeah, it's so funny.
His voice was just perfect.
He accosts Phyllis in the lobby. It's another brilliant characterization on this show. So this episode, though, I guess the thing that always bothers me, and it's interesting to see what you guys think about this. So do you think they should not have gotten married at all? I mean, how do you have this series about Rhoda, who historically was, man-hungry Rhoda? Are you just going to have her be continually man-hungry on her own series? Or do you think that the wedding was the natural progression? Or do you think they just did it too soon? What are your thoughts on that?
At the time, I understood, and I thought it was going in that direction. And I understood, like I said, I was a very kid, so I didn't understand TV. Now looking back at it this past week when watching it, I think they showed in the episode why it was a mistake. When you went back and looked at her and Mary's dating life on the Mary Tyler Moore Show and how funny those experiences were. And I think if she had the dating experience in Minneapolis is so different from the characters you'll meet dating in New York, that could have been such an interesting minefield to do with all those bad dates that she had.
So rich.
Even if they held off the wedding, if she'd meet Joe right away, that's fine. Or just the little incidents that happened in her life dating, because everything that could happen would happen to Rhoda. I think that would have been a funnier way to play it and be able to play it out longer, personally.
She could have been the female Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Very much so.
That's a good point.
I personally like that she got married because Mary was the single woman. And this is kind of a very big change for Rhoda. I liked the idea.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that she was married. I liked her with Joe. I liked Joe. I think he was a good actor. Was he as good as Judd Hirsch? No. But I also can't picture Judd Hirsch in that role in any way. But he would have played it much differently, I'm sure.
Well, ironically, you can see what he would be like because he guest starred on 2 episodes in the 4th season. He played this guy named Mike. That Rhoda goes out with. I think he was the first guy that she dates after her divorce is final. So you can kind of see, you got a taste of what he would have been like as Joe. Granted, it's a different character, but they go much more toe to toe in the episode. So I don't know. The good thing about David Groh is, and I think he's supposed to be Italian. Actually, Valerie Harper said Girardi, but his name was Gerard, not Girardi. But yeah. I know he wasn't Jewish. Because remember the episode where she introduces, I don't know if you guys saw this, there's an episode like 2 episodes or 3 episodes before when Martin mentions to Ida that she always vacuums when she's upset. And then Rhoda brings Joe over to meet Ida and they leave and Ida starts vacuuming. So she's clearly upset that he's not Jewish. So I think maybe Judd Hirsch would have been too on the spot with Valerie Harper, but I think it would have certainly been more dynamic.
It also probably would have stayed Jewish.
Yes, much more Jewish. I mean, they have a Christmas episode, I think, in the second season, there's a Christmas episode. No mention of Hanukkah. It's Christmas. Now, there are plenty of Jews who, don't celebrate Hanukkah, who celebrate Christmas, but it's just so funny how, as you said, Scott, the guilt, the Jewish mother from Nancy Walker in the first scene just totally kind of goes out the window once they get married. And they didn't want to do a Bridget Loves Bernie thing with, one's Catholic. They didn't want to weigh on that, but it's still a factor. that they lost.
Yeah, and it's something they could have played off of. It's something they could have wrote about and played off of. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So after this fabulous wedding, you know, they have what, two good years, a year and a half of good marriage.
Right.
And then out of the blue, Joe says he's not happy and he leaves. And then it's just it's a very depressing show after that. It's so hard for me to, it's acted very well. I got to tell you, Valerie Harper is heartbreaking in a lot of those episodes, but then you're just like, well, but this is I'm all for touching moments in comedy. Don't get me wrong, but there's touching and then there's depressing. And it's depressing to spend time with this character who's so unhappy and with her life, right. You know, and it doesn't get better. That's the thing. The joy is completely gone.
It doesn't get better, and with too much change at one time. As you said, the parents moved away, and I got to say, I love Harold Gould. I've always loved him. So I was really, I liked him very much on this show. I thought he played off Ida really well.
They were a great couple.
Yeah, they were a great couple. But, you know, Joe left, they were gone, and then Rhoda switches apartments with Ron Silver. Yeah. And they turn his apartment into this ridiculous swinging bachelor's pad, kind of just so cartoonish. It just, I could go on about how much I hated the show after that.
And the singer, was his name Johnny Desmond? I think his name was Johnny Desmond. I can't remember.
No, it wasn't Johnny Bravo.
It wasn't Johnny Bravo, no.
Brady Bunch, but yeah, I think you're right. It was Deadman.
Yeah,
but I'm not 100%.
Well, they also had Rhoda's dates as being real buffoons. I mean, Joe was a hot guy who was intelligent and had a nice business, and then she had these losers that were cartoon characters. It just did not work.
I know it's unfortunate that they just seemed to lose their way, and then they tried to find their way back, and they just couldn't. And the series just petered out.
It was such an aspirational character, both in Mary Tyler Moore and here, right? I mean, she was a single girl and had these foibles, but she still was someone that you kind of wanted to be. Then after the divorce, it's like there wasn't anything to be aspirational about. I think they lost a little bit of that, and that's what you had, all those depressive things and nothing really to admire as much anymore. The shop was okay when they brought in Morgenstern, but it's like it still wasn't.
Myrna Morgenstern.
Exactly right. Had a couple good plays off, but it just didn't bring the aspirational aspect there anymore.
It was good that they brought in a friend for Rhoda other than Brenda, because Mary had her friends until Rhoda and Phyllis moved away. So I think it was a good idea. They just brought in the wrong person. The people they brought in general, were just not good choices.
No, they never were, and I don't understand why. I remember Nick Lobo. Remember, he was the so there's the accordion at the wedding, and then they must have thought, oh, that's a great character to date Brenda, and so they bring in Richard Masur, and he becomes Nick Lobo, and that character, I'm like, that character was fun, but okay, it's still not a great character.
He would have been a funny one episode character.
Yes, exactly. And that's what they tried to take these characters, and the singer's name was Johnny Venture. And the singer on the show that they brought in, the lounge singer, Johnny Venture. Another one episode character. And they would take these characters and try to stretch them out into make them, series characters. And other than Ron Silver, who I really like, and his character changed. He wasn't so obnoxious as his episodes went on. He actually became a friend to them, which I thought was a great idea. They were also obnoxious.
I got to point something out, though. We have sat here and talked most of this episode about how bad the show became. And I think we need to emphasize it's because it was so beloved the first three. It was a great show. It was outstanding. Yes. So I think what's being expressed here is our heartbreak over what was just an outstanding show. I think that's why we're stuck into what happened to it.
Because it's a mystery. I mean, and just like millions of people who wrote into CBS, we're upset too 50 years later. Why did you destroy this show? And you're right. The first two seasons, there's a fabulous episode. I think it's the first episode of the second season with where Carlton's mother. Mm-hmm. Have you guys seen that episode?
Carlton got fired.
Rhoda gets Carlton fired because Carlton lets in burglars, and they clean out Rhoda and Joe, totally wipe them out. So Rhoda gets Carlton fired, and his mother shows up and knocks on the door, and who is it? But it's Ruth Gordon. And it's such a great episode. You have any spare meat? She asks her if she has any spare meat lying around. I mean, again, you're relying on a co-star for your show, which isn't great, but what a brilliant episode too.
Well, I mean, yeah, we have to give the show its props. I mean, as much as we're trying to talking about different aspects of it, I mean, it was the number one episode of the 70s until Roots came along, the premiere episode. I mean, and as far as it had huge accolades.
Right.
That wedding was its second most wedding only to Corporal Klinger, and that's because that was Smash's thing, right? And that was such a small part of it. It's like, yeah.
There's some trivia for you. Yeah, well, the pilot episode, Joe, that you talked about earlier, was it set a record by being the very first television series ever to have a number one premiere, ever. For a number one rating for its premiere episode. So it was immediately out of the gate. It was going like gangbusters.
And the transition was really, really well done because you had Rhoda and Mary in the very early, they were calling each other back and forth. A few days before the wedding episode, they were talking about, on the Mary Tyler Moore episode, going to Rhoda's wedding. It was really well done, the transition.
It was, and it made so much sense. I think originally when they were pitching the pilot, they didn't want to move her back to New York. I can't remember exactly where they wanted to move Rhoda to, and they're like, no, that's so silly. They thought that the reason that the character of Rhoda worked was because it was a fish out of water with her in Minneapolis. But I mean, it makes so much sense for her to go back to New York. That makes perfect sense.
New York, this is your last chance.
Exactly. And what a great opening the first year too, with that whole little monologue about my name is Rhoda Morgenstern. It's just Valerie Harper. She's such a gifted actress. And we talked a little bit about this on Mary Tyler Moore. She works so hard to make her accent, her dialect impeccable. And she worked so hard to ground Rhoda in this reality that worked so well.
Yes.
Until it didn't.
I am amazed, Tony, that you have not brought somebody up, because you brought up Ruth Gordon as being a great guest.
I know. But you know why? Because it depresses me.
Oh, Vivian?
Because I don't think it worked.
Vivian Vance?
I don't think it worked. Vivian Vance. It didn't.
How many episodes was she on?
She just did 2.
2, and then she got too sick?
Her health wasn't great, but it wasn't a good character. It wasn't a defined character. And did you know who her husband was? Her husband was David White, a.k.a. Larry Tate.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Bewitched.
I just remember being excited that she was on.
It was great to see her, in a role that wasn't Viv, in a role that wasn't Ethel Mertz or Viv. But I think she was, I think her health was in problems. I think there was some problems with the filming too. She wasn't getting all of her lines. Because if you watch the episode, a lot of her lines are close-ups, which is a big indication that they're cuts. That okay, now we've got to get her lines, so we're going to move the camera. And so they're done after the studio audience left, which is always a really big clue that somebody's not getting their lines, because why else would you cut to a close-up on one line? I think that there were just too many problems with her health. But the character was so ill-defined anyway. I mean, I don't really think it was.
I barely remember. She just was the nice elderly neighbor, wasn't she, or something like that?
She was a working woman. She wrote commercials, TV commercials, and she meets Rhoda in the laundry room, and Rhoda and Joe go out with her and her husband for dinner, and Ida comes over to babysit, and Ida immediately gets jealous because she's like, "Why are you hanging out with this old lady? I'm your mother. You should hang out with me." So that was the point of the episode. And then she was in one more episode, and I think that was.
I'd forgotten about those. I was surprised people didn't take Dan Mira more, but they really didn't like her character either. And I'm a huge Dan Mira fan.
I am too. Yeah. It was just, there was some Sally, she played a flight attendant. I think she just got lost in the shuffle.
Stiller played her ex-husband on one episode.
He did.
God, they were great together.
Right.
I think that by this time they were just like throwing their line out, trying to catch a fish anywhere. Which we're going back to talking about how the show went downhill as opposed to celebrating how great it was the first 2 years, and it was.
I tried to bring it back, and we just went right back again.
You know, when I was a kid, one of my favorite books was this big picture book, and it was called Big Picture Book. It was called The Great TV Sitcom Book. And there was an article, there was a chapter or a section on Rhoda. And I'll never forget what the guy said. His last line was, you know, the best way to watch Rhoda is on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And sad, but true.
That's true.
That was Rhoda at her best, but I like the change in the beginning.
And we haven't really talked about Harold Gould at all in the episode, and their little part downstairs when she gets there. I mean, Harold Gould is such an amazing actor in himself. I mean, the stage work is so impressive.
Yeah, and he was in The Sting. Remember him? He was in the. I mean, he's so accomplished. You know, he was in The Sting. He played Miles forever on Golden Girls. That's a great scene between the two of them when he says, "It's good to see ya." I mean, that's really touching. Oh, I know what I want to talk about. My favorite part of one of my very favorite parts of the episode is when he leaves her in the elevator and he runs to get her corsage, and they're playing the wedding march. So she walks down the aisle, and that neighbor comes out with her garbage and says, "What's new?" "Not much." Same here. And she
So
walks
New York.
right by her. It's so New York.
1970s New York.
That was a great bit. That was a great.
Where was this stuff 2 years later? Where were these brilliant little bits 2 years later? So, yeah.
I probably thought what most people thought when he walked into the apartment and she was in the elevator, that the door was going to close and she goes downstairs. That's what I was waiting to
Well, there was lots of great moments when Nancy is trying to stall for time and introduces Mary again for the third time to the grandmother, or whatever, fourth time.
Did you see Grandmother Morgenstern sitting there? in the wedding? Yeah. I love the fact that they brought Lou and Murray in. I thought that could have been tricky, but they built it up in the Mary Tyler Moore, like Brad said, you know, they let it in for the episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I think it's called A New Sue Ann. Maybe it's not New Sue Ann. It's another episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show where they take her to the airport. So they've set it up on the Mary Tyler Moore Show that Lou and Murray are taking her to the airport, and then they end up in New York, which is a wonderful. It just makes sense. It does what you said that you didn't like about Lou Grant, Brad, was that it acknowledges a history. It acknowledges a past. You know, these people just didn't appear. Hello, you have a history. These people were in your life. They didn't just disappear. And I think Mary Tyler Moore did a guest shot at the end of this first season. I think it's called Along Comes Mary. And it's when Rhoda says, "Mary, I got to be honest with you. You look like you put on some weight." And Mary says, "I think I gained about 10 pounds." And Rhoda goes, "Leave it to you, Mary, to gain weight in your erogenous zones." Because she's very, very curvy. And I think she made 4 episodes total appearance on Rhoda. And, you know, Rhoda came back for the last episode. So they did acknowledge their past, and they did acknowledge their history, which kind of went out the window after the Mary Tyler Moore Show went off the air.
Do you know, Tony, since this was filmed in front of a live audience, did they do the entire hour-long scene in front of the same audience or in one take, or did they do like 2 parts? Do you know that part at all?
No, they did it all. It was all one filming. What's interesting, though, is they filmed the scenes, obviously, that took place on the streets of Manhattan, were filmed in the summer before the show premiered. So can you imagine you're in Manhattan? Because the one scene, she's at Verdi Square, Needle Park, which is 72nd Street and Broadway. You can see Gray's Papaya right across the street. And she's, you know, before she gets on the subway. So people are walking by going, "Who's that woman in a..." "What? Oh, it's Valerie Harper." You know what I mean? So the show had not premiered yet when they filmed this sequence in the summertime. So people who were seeing Valerie Harper in a wedding dress had no clue what was going on. And then I'm sure once the show premiered, they're like, "I saw that. I was there." They're like Hazel.
Well, that's a fun.
Like Hazel Frederick.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what was really obvious to me was, you know, they showed all the scenes of Rhoda trying to get to her parents' apartment. And then when she comes into the front door of the apartment building, the audience goes nuts.
They went nuts.
So they obviously, they stopped the scene. They obviously watched all that on a screen.
Exactly.
And then she bust in and they were just going crazy.
Exactly.
It was so obvious to me, and I thought it was fun.
That's such a smart thing to do. And the audience reaction, you're like, oh, they've just been watching her whole thing obviously without the cuts. You know, when they cut back to the wedding and they cut back to the wedding. So they would just watch this whole thing of her on the streets of New York. The screen goes black and she runs through the door on the set and she's live. It's just, it's magical. It really is.
So listener, if it sounds like we hated this show, we did not. Watch at least the first 3 seasons and definitely watch this episode. It's just fun.
Oh, yeah. It's on YouTube. Fun. It's so easy to watch.
I just want to emphasize, it sounds like we hated the show. This show was great in the beginning.
Well, no, we didn't hate this. We hate what happened to it. I think
which shows our love.
Yes, exactly. I think we are very fervent fans of the character of Rhoda Morgenstern. And we, even though we were all, pretty much toddlers or less when it originally aired, as fans of this show, you wanted it to work because you love her so much. And it's disappointing that it doesn't. But this episode, absolutely, one of the greatest episodes in TV history. Hands down.
Hugely watched. I love the end credits where they showed extra part of her kind of going through the streets of New York. It's the first time they ever did the extra credit scenes, which is amazing. And I love that.
Yes. Yeah.
So before we wrap up, Scott, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your shows?
I do. I've been doing podcasts now for 8 years. I do primarily interviews with great people like Tony, people from entertainment, foodies, music, books, and advocacy for our LGBTQ community and straight allies. And I just really enjoy getting people's stories out there. So that's kind of fun. I've been doing it for 8 years now and can't wait to talk about your guys' stories when you come in August to Palm Springs.
And I think it's safe to say wherever you're listening to this show, you will find Scott's show.
There you go.
And we'll have the link in the show notes.
Thank you, Scott.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to be the first guest, and especially for an episode that I love in a television show that I love. So amazing. I think you guys are doing such great work. I'm excited to see what you guys have coming down the pike because this is my era. I love the shows and everything you guys are talking about.
Well, we appreciate it. We've got a Spotify playlist that we put up for if the music's available for songs that I can't sing. Although you just heard at the top of the show, you heard Brad's rendition of Rhoda's theme. So I don't think
we'll probably be pulled off of Spotify.
I don't think you can top that with special lyrics by me written on the slide. So thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. Thank you, Brad. And Brad, let's not say goodbye. Let's just say au revoir.
No, let's say goodbye.